אוקיי, בואי. כשאת מתחילה, תעשי החלטה, בסדר? בסדר?
Hello. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for the wave. Now I know you can hear me. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Okay. It's always a special moment to start here at Matan, a new year, to restart our course with the same title as last year, Contemporary Halachic Topics, but of course, different topics, different issues will be discussed this year. But this special moment this year is a time of great difficulty for all of Am Yisrael, a really challenging time for all of us. And Am Yisrael always, when we are in difficult times, rush to try and fill our time with asiyah, with actions, with doing. How much can we do to try and feel like we are really helping to aid the situation, to improve the difficult times which we find ourselves in? And Am Yisrael over the last week have done so much, doing so much chesed, so much gemilut chasadim. The actions of cooking and baking and bringing and shopping and so many wonderful opportunities of giving and of generously giving and helping others. It truly is remarkable. Another example of an action which Am Yisrael often run to in difficult times is learning Torah. And please God, today, together for the next hour, through our learning Torah, we will, please God, be learning to bring zechut for a refuah shlema for all those who need it, for the immediate return of all those who have been taken captive, for comfort for all of those around us who are grieving, and for the hatzlacha and the safety of all of our soldiers. So without further ado, let us begin with our course of contemporary halachic topics. For those who were in my class last year, we began with, like today, an introductory class to the halachic process in general. What I will be doing today will have a little bit of overlap with last year, for those of you who remember exactly what I said, but I will be taking this introduction in a different direction from last year. If we begin by first establishing what is the purpose or the purposes of this course, what are we trying to achieve with this course over the year of analyzing different contemporary halachic dilemmas which arise? What exactly is our focus here? So one of our purposes is to really appreciate the halachic process, to appreciate the halachic process which governs so much of our lives, and to understand the background to halachic decisions more, so that we can ultimately appreciate the bottom line when we reach it. Of course, by analyzing the halachic process, we are also delving into the word of Hashem and bringing ourselves closer to Hashem and building up this relationship which we have with him. We say in the spiritual world, it isn't merely enough to yearn to be close to Hashem, but we actually have to take practical steps to do so, to achieve this. And we do this through the mechanism of halacha. What exactly is halacha? The root, the shoresh of the word halacha is to go. So firstly, we can say we are going from the theory, from the theoretical rules into the practical world, into the practical worlds of our everyday real actions. It also, halacha also, from the shoresh of to go, it teaches us which path we should be going on. It guides us in the direction of Hashem, in the direction of the Torah and the will of Hashem. And it is the way in which we are directed to go to reach Hashem's will. Now, a little bit of an introduction as to what halakha is comprised of. We know that there is the Torah Shebechtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So if we start from the basics, we have the written law and we have the oral law. The written law, the Torah or the Tanakh, and then the oral law, which we call the Talmud, which is primarily the Mishnah and the Gemara. It's called the oral law because it was originally Torah Sheba'al Peh, just verbal conversations that were taking place, discussing what the halakha should be in different situations. However, the oral law too was eventually written down. But we have this partnership between the written law and the oral law, and they really go hand in hand. There is no mitzvah, no halakha, no law that's given in the Torah Shebechtav, in the written Torah, which we can fully understand or even begin to understand or interpret without the assistance of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, of the oral law. And any detail or rule which we find in the Torah Shebechtav demands further explanation or expansion or interpretation, which we find, at least to begin with, in the Talmud, in the Torah Sheba'al Peh. We find this especially, as we'll see, as we have totally new modern situations and halakhic questions which arise. For example, as we have advances in medicine, as we have advances in technology. And these new situations confront us, and we then have to attempt to apply this old age Torah, this old age halakha to these new situations. The oral law contains various different types of mitzvot or of isurim, positive commandments or negative commandments. One of the first things or areas of law that is contained in the oral law is what we call halakha leMoshe Sinai, literally meaning halakha, the laws that were given to Moshe at Sinai, at Mount Sinai. And it essentially is what is not written down in the Torah, but what we take to believe in our tradition to be the conversations, so to speak, that occurred between Hashem and Moshe as he went up Har Sinai. And if something in the oral law is entitled, and this is halakha leMoshe Sinai, we take it to be a Torah commandment. So quite often we might say, this is a mitzvah d'oraita and this is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. This is a Torah command and this is a rabbinic command. But within the oral law, even though, as I said, it is sort of detailing the conversations that occurred between different rabbanim over the centuries, and we will go through the history in just a moment, we have both Torah commands and rabbinic commands detailed in the oral law. So again, if we have something that is said to be halakha leMoshe Sinai within the oral law, that is on a Torah level, on a d'oraita level. We also have other Torah commandments which have been extrapolated, which have been derived from some very basic wording in the Torah itself. And how do the rabbis do this? They do this through what we call the midot shehatorah nidreshet bahem. Again, quite literally meaning the ways in which we will extrapolate and derive laws from the Torah. And for example, I'll just throw out maybe the most common one of these midot shehatorah nidreshet bahem. For example, there's a kal v'chomer. There's a principle that I can derive a rule that has not been explicitly written down, but I can derive it by this principle of a kal v'chomer. What does it mean? I have a situation, and the situation has been explicitly described in the Torah, and the din has been given as well. So situation A has been described in the Torah, and the law is that it's fine. It's mutar to do X, Y, and Z. I then have a situation which arises, and this situation seems to me to be so much more lenient. It's a much lighter situation. It's a much easier situation. So I say, if in situation A, I was allowed to do X, Y, and Z, kal vachomer, how much more so in this lighter, easier situation, I'm definitely allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And you can see that this principle is based on logic. However, we don't make up kal vachomers, or we don't work out rules applying a kal vachomer whenever we want. We have actually specific kal vachomers which are brought in the Talmud from so many hundreds of years ago, which are using this specific principle to derive the laws. And again, a lot of rules which are derived using kal vachomer and all the other principles which we're not discussing in detail today. Again, these rules, although not explicitly written in the Torah, are considered to be of a Torah level. They're binding on us on a Torah level. And then, of course, there is a huge corpus of rabbinic commands which are added on as a secondary level, let's say, on top of all these Torah commandments. We have two main types of rabbinic commands. We have gzerot and we have takanot. Gzerot are put into place by the rabbis primarily when they are concerned that if we don't have this extra gzerah, if we don't have this extra boundary, this extra something that's been forbidden, we may come to violate a Torah command. Takanot are quite different. And with takanot, the rabbis have put something in place to respond to a very specific challenge or question or situation that arose. It could even be a specific challenge just for a very specific place and time. And for that specific place, village, city, town, at a specific time in Jewish history, they made a takana because they saw a necessity to put such a thing in place. Of course, the rabbis could also make up positive commandments. For example, the festival of Hanukkah is a positive commandment and is an example of something that was instituted by the rabbis and is not found written in the Torah. In the Orthodox world, we don't actually distinguish between Torah and rabbinic rules. And I'm about to caveat what I just said, but I'll say it again first. If someone is an observant Jew trying to observe all the mitzvot, they do not make a distinction between those on a Torah and on a rabbinic level. This, however, I will caveat, obviously changes if we enter into a situation of, for example, of shat hadcha, of an extreme circumstances where we've got an extreme need, whether there's some danger to someone's health or to someone's life or to someone's money. There are dangers or harms or damages that may come into place, and we're looking for a leniency, and then it will become highly relevant to us to know or to analyze whether the rules that are in play in this scenario are Torah laws or are rabbinic laws. And then it will become relevant, and it will become very much part of the halachic conversation as to what conclusion we can reach and what leniencies we may apply, depending on whether we're dealing with Torah and or rabbinic commands. All of this, as I said, is just a mere introduction, but the principles that I'm mentioning and the ideas that I'm mentioning, we are going to see in play in all of the following shiurim, please God, in all the different scenarios and issues that we'll bring as examples. We will see exactly how this is applied in practice in the halachic process. We're looking for a leniency. We're going to put a few different reasons together. And some or many of these reasons will say, given the special circumstances, and given that this law is rabbinically commanded, we are going to, in this situation, reach a lenient conclusion. So all of this will become more practical and less theoretical as the weeks go on. Please go. If I turn now to a very brief history, we will literally just be grabbing at the main eras which I want to use to show you the development of the halakha, the development of the halakhic process, and where we go in understanding how to reach a halakhic conclusion. We haven't touched a source sheet yet today. I hope they sent you a source sheet, but today's share really does not depend on too many sources at all, which perhaps is out of character of me slightly, but I thought it best, especially as really everyone's on Zoom today, to not depend so much on a source sheet today. But what do we find in the majority of our source sheets? We might start with a pasuk or two, with a verse from the Torah. What else are we finding besides for going right back to the earliest source that we can, the Torah itself? What are we finding on a source sheet? What are we finding in a halakhic answer that someone gives? What are they referring to? Over the ages, how has the halakha developed? So that's what we're going to look at briefly now, the history of the halakhic process. Post-biblical times, essentially, so remember we have Tanakh ending during the reign, or during the time of the establishment of the second Bet HaMikdash. Ezra and Nehemiah were the main leaders who led Am Yisrael to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash, the second Bet HaMikdash, and we have from then on, as Tanakh ends, we have the rest of the stories and the situations which occurred in the time of the second Bet HaMikdash until its destruction in the year 70 CE. And for example, the story of Hanukkah, which doesn't fall into our Tanakh, which occurred in the time of the second Bet HaMikdash with the defilement of the second Bet HaMikdash and then the repurification of the second Bet HaMikdash. That's one example of a story and of a festival that is pinned to a historic event that happens after the Tanakh finishes. What do we have at this time? We have immediately afterwards the period, the era of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, some of whom, I'll just throw out some names, which we will recognize, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, who are famous for instituting the wording of our tefillah, some of whom are Ezra and Nehemiah, Mordechai from the Purim story, etc. So after the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, we have the time period of the Tanaim. We're talking now basically from the year roughly 0 to 200 CE. We have the period of the Tanaim. These are the people whose conversations we are hearing and we are analyzing in the Mishnayot. The Mishnah, which is the first section of the Talmud, of the Torah Shebaal Peh, of our oral law, the Mishnah is detailing the conversations and debates and arguments of the Tanaim. Again, just to throw out some names, some early and famous Tanaim are Hillel and Shammai and Rabbi Akiva, and later Tanaim, many of the students of Rabbi Akiva. And finally, we had Rav Yehuda Hanassi, who took it upon himself to write down the Mishnah. And he wrote down these Mishnayot, these conversations, who said what, who gave his opinion on what situation, and he wrote it down. The question of why he wrote it down is really a question for a topic for another shir, as they say, but it was written down in roughly the year 200. And after that date, it essentially was universally accepted that no one could argue with the comments and the rulings of the Tanaim in the Mishnah. No one could argue against them because the Tanaim were that much closer to Moshe and accepting the Torah on Har Sinai and the revelation at Har Sinai. And therefore, no one could argue against what they had interpreted and understood from the Torah. However, of course, that doesn't mean that we couldn't have a huge continuation, primarily from the Amoraim, whose conversation we find in the Gemara. And what they're doing there is a number of things. Firstly, we're now talking roughly the years 200 to 500. Firstly, within the Mishnah itself, there were often debates found between the Tanaim. One person would say this is kasher, one person would say this is pasul. One person would say this is tamei, one person would say this is tahor. So one of the things that we find in the Gemara is that the Amoraim are saying we should follow this Tana. We should follow this opinion. This should be our halacha. Sometimes in the Mishnah, it's written in very clearly, we should follow such and such Tana for the halacha. But if it isn't, that of course fell upon the Amoraim to be able to choose between these two or multiple opinions that were offered in the Mishnah. Now, they really did apply certain rules in coming to these conclusions. So within the Gemara, we will often have, for example, the choosing of Hillel's opinion over Shammai. That kind of is a rule that was applied, that in a machloket, in a debate between Hillel and Shammai, we follow Hillel. Besides for in such and such exceptions, because every rule has its exceptions. They would apply a rule, for example, that if there was an anonymous opinion given, the Tana Kama, we will very often follow the opinion, the ruling of the Tana Kama, of that anonymous opinion in the Mishnah, and so on and so forth. There are different rules that they applied in reaching their conclusions. That is not all that the Amoraim in the Gemara are doing. They are also very often debating the reasons behind the rulings in the Mishnah. So such and such Tana has reached this conclusion, and we are now going to suggest the reason for his ruling. And one Amora might give one reason, and one Amora might give another reason. And of course, there may be practical ramifications depending on which reason we accept for the ruling. Another thing that they do in the Gemara is that the Amoraim might say, when Rav Yossi ruled that this is tamei, he's talking about this very specific example, and they will explain more clearly, or they'll expand upon what exactly the situation was. And of course, by doing so, they will either limit or expand the practicalities of when we apply the ruling from such and such Tana in the Mishnah. And so, of course, the halacha was developed hugely within these 300 years. And the halacha developed through this process of arguing backwards and forwards and defining a situation and finding a reason and trying to reach a halachic conclusion within the Gemara. And of course, as we know, at the end of each sugya or each page or each conversation within the Gemara, we don't always reach such a clear conclusion at all. But that is where the conversation was developing at that time, during that era. And this, by the way, was occurring in both Bavel and in Israel. So in both Bavel and Israel, there were great centers of learning. The Talmud Bavli was dominant at that time. And if you just throw out the word Gemara, it's really taken to mean the Talmud Bavli, but there is also the Talmud Yerushalmi. And this is really what was happening during those years, up to 500. From 500 to 1000, roughly, CE, we have the period of the Gaonim. The Gaonim have less impact than the Tanaim and the Amoraim on the process of the halacha. And I'm going to jump actually straight to the Rishonim, who begin in 1000, again, roughly 1000 to 1500 CE. The Rishonim, this 500-year period, spans a lot of years, a lot of different people. They include, for example, a famous early Rishon is Rashi. In France, he is famously known for his commentary on the whole of the Torah, but he also has his commentary on the whole of the Talmud. And for example, there is also Tosafot, a group of rabbis slightly later from France and Germany, who also comment on the Talmud and very often disagree with Rashi and argue against his understanding, etc., etc. The Rishonim add to the halachic process in two different ways. First of all, by their commentary on the Talmud, they are helping us understand some difficult parts of the Talmud. They are sometimes helping us understand why on this daf of the Gemara, we seem to come to the conclusion on a certain issue that this is mutar, but on a very different daf, we seem to discuss the very same issue and come to the opposite conclusion, that this may be asur. And how do we reach some resolution between this apparent contradiction? Sometimes that is the role of the Rishon, that he's trying to explain to us what we should do with such and such contradiction. However, there were other Rishonim who perhaps contributed even more to the development of halakha by their codification of the halakha. So what does this mean? There were Rishonim, for example, the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam, who took it upon themselves to codify the halakha. Most famously, perhaps, is the Yad Chazakah of the Rambam, the 14 books of the Rambam, in which he sets out what he thinks the halakha should be on every issue. And it is set out by issue, by topic, by subject, very clearly. All the rules that you may want to find about shofar are here. All the rules that you may want to find about sukkah are here. All the rules that you may want to find about the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash are here. All the rules that you may want to find about harming others, damaging others, and who has liability are here, etc., etc. And the codification that these Rishonim set about doing meant that from then onwards, halakha could be checked, could be verified without having to return to the Talmud, which, as we mentioned, is most definitely not codified or clearly set out by topic. It's the conversation that was going on in the Batei Midrash between the Amoraim, and they jumped from topic to topic, and one topic was being discussed, but it led someone to remind them about a whole list of things that they wanted to discuss at the same moment. And then the list of things segues into a whole different topic. And we very much find that broadly, the conversations within the Gemara are not at all by topic and not at all simple to follow exactly what is being discussed here and there. And this was quite radically changed by the codification of the halakha. And from then on, we find that the pattern followed. For example, the Torah sets out the halakha in, as we call it, the Arba Turim, and 4 different sections of halakha, and he is basing his codification on bringing together different views of the different Rishonim, topic by topic. One other thing I should add here, in these 500 years of the Rishonim, we also saw the development of shutim. Shutim is halachic responses. And for example, there was a very difficult, complex case that arose in a particular town or city, and they would refer it to the greatest rabbi authority that they could find at the time. And this halachic authority would author a responsa for this specific question and case that arose. And he would write this answer in a lot of detail and referring to different halachic principles that had been established before him. And these shutim also are fascinating in allowing us to see how they would apply years of halachic discussion to the contemporary halachic dilemmas of their time and how they would come to such conclusions. Now, the next period which we have from about 1500 onwards is the era of the Achronim, which we still say we find ourselves in today. The main event and work, which sort of was the great turnaround in history, falling roughly between the periods of the Rishonim and the Achronim, was the Spanish Inquisition in 1492, and Rav Yosef Caro, who was born in Spain a few years previously, eventually settled in Sfat. And Rav Yosef Caro wrote first his commentary on the Torah, which I just briefly mentioned a minute ago. And he's explaining very often the debate between the different Rishonim who have come before him and why they may be debating the halakha on different points. And he then goes further and he codifies his halachic opinion in the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch is still today definitely a go-to if we want a bottom line halachic answer on any different topic. We have, of course, had much written since the Shulchan Aruch, but it is, I would say, maybe the first go-to to open the Shulchan Aruch and to see what it says on any halachic question that may arise. The opinion of Rav Yosef Caro is taken to be the halachic ruling for the Sephardi community, and the gloss on the Shulchan Aruch written by Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, is taken to be the halachic ruling for the Ashkenazi community. The Shulchan Aruch is split into 4 sections based on the Torah. If I just briefly explain what different realms of halakha we have discussed in each one of these 4, we have first Yoredea. Yoredea is discussing issues of Isur v'Heter, of what's permissible, what's forbidden. For example, Basar v'Chalab, issues of meat and milk come up there. And I must say that if we are going to be referring to the Shulchan Aruch in Ashurim from now on, it will most often be, we'll find from different sections of Yoredea. Another one of the 4 compartments of the Shulchan Aruch is Orach Chaim, the way of life. This is detailing laws of our daily life and of our yearly life, of Chagim, of Shabbat, etc. There is also Even HaEzer, which discusses family matters, matters of weddings, marriages, divorce, giving a get, etc., etc. And finally, Choshen Mishpat discusses financial matters and matters that occur between one Jew and another, one Jew and his neighbor, one Jew and his business partner, etc., etc. Now, the majority of commentators who came after the Shulchan Aruch were basically commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. You have many of the later Achronim who are commenting, you can see them in different volumes, they're commenting on the page of the Shulchan Aruch. They're explaining what the Shulchan Aruch is referring to exactly. Can I just clarify for you what situation I think he's ruling on? Or they may view their disagreement and say why they disagree with the bottom line conclusion that the Shulchan Aruch, that Rav Yosef Caro has reached. There are, of course, also different shutim, as we discussed before, different halachic responsa. So over the years, different halachic questions have been raised specific to a specific place in the Jewish community or a broader question, and they've been answered by different achronim in great detail. And we have also these shutim alongside the more systematic codification of the halakha, which we find in the Shulchan Aruch and in the commentaries thereon. Now, with this very brief history of the development of the halachic process in mind, I want to really ask a more philosophical question about the development of the halakha. Because if it all begins in the words of our Torah Shebichtav, in the words of the Torah in itself, where exactly do we find room for this interpretation, for this expansion, for the application of the age-old Torah to any new situation or question that may arise in our modern era? The question is heightened if we look at source 1. On the source sheet, we have in source 1 a pasuk from Sefer Dvarim, and it says, "Et kol hadavar asher anochi mitzaveh etchem oto tishmeru la'asot." Everything that I've commanded you to do, you should do. You should keep it. Lo tosef alav velo tigra mimenu, and do not add to it and do not detract from it. Now, this seems quite explicit and quite sort of strict and rigid. We have been told what to do. We've been commanded what to do and what not to do. That's what we should follow. And we shouldn't add anything or take anything away from these rules. The Rambam himself, whose philosophical view of the development of halakha we're about to analyze, the Rambam himself uses this very pasuk, which we've just read, to be the basis of one of his key principles of faith. And that is that we cannot amend the word of the Torah. We cannot play with the word of the Torah as it's been given. It's there, it's rigid, it's in place firmly and strictly for us to follow, and we can't make any additions or subtractions to it. However, we know, and we've just seen, that over the years, humans have very, very much been involved in the process of halakha, in its development, in its expansion, in its application, in its interpretation, etc. And therefore, we will look into this in a specific famous example, which I'm about to read with you from source 2, and we'll try and understand where exactly we may draw the line, or where exactly different philosophers and halakhic authorities over the years have drawn the line in trying to understand what our role here is in the development of halakha. So this is from the Talmud, from Masechet Baba Metzia. Do not be put off that it's a very, very long source. I will read it with you. We won't be reading every single word. And we have here the famous case in source 2, V'zehu Tanur Shalachnai. We have the famous case of the Tanur Shalachnai, the oven of Achnai, which was a point of great contention. And the question was brought to the Bet Midrash, and there was a huge debate as to the status of this oven. Was it tamei or was it tahar? And what happened was that the vast majority of the Rabbanim, the Chachamim, came to one conclusion, and Rabbi Eliezer came to the opposite conclusion. And we will pick it up 5 lines into the source. Amar lahem, Rabbi Eliezer turns to the Chachamim and he says to them, Im halakha kamoti, if I'm right, and this tanur is indeed tamei, charuv zeh yochia. This carob tree standing here outside our Bet Midrash will
We lost your voice. I don't hear any sound. Yeah, okay, yep. Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay, I'll go back a sentence. The carob tree at that moment picked up and moved miraculously. Amrullah, I've skipped a few words. Amrullah, en mevi'in ra'ya min ha'charuv. The Chachamim were not the remotest bit interested. They weren't fazed. They merely turned to Rabbi Eliezer and they said, no, you can't bring proofs from carob trees. He carries on. Chazar va'amar lahem. So he turns to them again and he says to them, Im halakha kamoti. If I am correct, amat hamayim yochichu. this stream flowing past our Bet Midrash will prove it to you. Chazru amat hamayim la'achareim. And the stream turned mid-flow and started flowing upstream. Water will always flow downstream. And the stream turned about and started flowing upstream. Amrulo, en mevi'in raya me'amat hamayim. They turned to him again, totally uninterested, and said, we do not bring halachic proofs from streams of water. Chazar va'amar lahem, im halacha kamoti, if I'm correct, kotlei bet midrash yochichu. The walls of our bet midrash will prove it to you. Atu kotlei bet midrash lepol. So the walls of their bet midrash start caving in, they start bending in. Ga'ar bahem Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua turned to them and rebuked them. Amar lahem, he said to them, im talmidei chachamim menatzchim zeh b'halacha, atem matibchem. He turns to them and he rebukes them. He says, excuse me, if there is a sharp debate going on here amongst the Chachamim in this Bet Midrash, it's none of your business. What's it got to do with you? So they didn't fall in, they didn't totally cave in out of respect to Rabbi Yoshua and his rebuke of them. But they didn't totally straighten themselves back out because of respect, out of respect to Rabbi Eliezer. They're still sort of standing there, slanted, starting to bend inwards. Chazar va'amar lahem, im halachak moti, and Rabbi Eliezer turns to them one more time and he says, if the halakha is according to my ruling, min hashamayim yochifu, it will be proven to you from the heavens themselves. Yatsata bat kol va'amra malachem etzel Rabbi Eliezer shehalachak moto b'chol pam b'chol makom. A heavenly voice cries out, a divine voice suddenly sounds, and it says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? The halakha always follows Rabbi Eliezer in every situation. Amad Rabbi Yoshua al Raglav, and at the sound of the divine voice, Rabbi Yoshua stands up and he says, Lo bashamayim hi. He quotes from the Torah, Lo bashamayim hi. It's not in heaven. My lo bashamayim hi. What did he mean? Lo bashamayim hi. It's not in heaven. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Shekavar natna Torah mehar Sinai, enanu mashgichin bebat kol. Once, how do we understand his statement? Once we have accepted the Torah at Har Sinai, we no longer rely on divine voices to come and dictate the halakha to us. Because the Torah which we accepted on Har Sinai has already told us, acharei rabim lahatot. It's already told us, how do you decide halakha in the situation that there is a debate? Acharei rabim lahatot. You follow the majority. And therefore, Rabbi Yehoshua was having none of it. The Chachamim were not interested in all these signs and proofs of Rabbi Eliezer, and they were not even fazed by the bat kol which sounded from the heavens, because they said, we have already been given the Torah in our hands, and we've already been told in the Torah which you have entrusted into our hands, that in case of a debate, you follow the majority. And the majority of people say that this oven is tahor. And we do not care if Rabbi Eliezer says it's tameh. And we do not care if a bat kol sounds and tells us that Rabbi Eliezer is correct in his ruling. The halakha has most definitely been given and entrusted into our hands, into the hands of the humans, of fallible humans. Because we are now no longer searching really for a divine, ultimate, objective truth. We are searching for the truth which we as humans are able to unearth within the words of the Torah. And we can only do so in our human, fallible way. And there is a gorgeous postscript to this story that says, Rabbi Natan leEliyahu. Rabbi Natan turns to Eliyahu, Amarle, he says to him, Maya Vira Kadosh Baruch Hu b'hahi shata. What was Hashem doing in the heavens at that moment in time? When Rabbi Yeshua stood up and said, Lo b'shamayim hi, and the Chachamim ignored Rabbi Eliezer's minority ruling, even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu had agreed with it. What was HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing at that time? The Amarle, and he said to him, Ka chiyech v'amar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just smiled and said, Nitzchuni banai, Nitzchuni banai. As if my children have defeated me, my children have triumphed over me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that moment in time smiled upon what was happening, and he said, they have triumphed over me, or they have defeated me, they've been victorious over me. This is how the halachic process is supposed to work now. I gave them this most special matana, gift, present, guidebook. I gave it to them and entrusted it into their hands. And they have principles with which to interpret it, and they have rules with which to understand it or to resolve debates. And it's now in their hands. And this is the situation as it should be. They should follow the majority and they should rule as they best understand it. And Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful alternative interpretation of these words at the end of the Gemara, Nitzchuni banai, from the Shoresh of Netzach, as if Hashem is saying, they've eternalized me, they've allowed me and my Torah and my words in the Torah to last forever. Because a rigid, purely objective Torah cannot necessarily last forever. It will be felt to be irrelevant in certain times. It will felt to be irrelevant in certain places. Only a Torah which is living and continuing and developing in the hands of, yes, fallible human beings. Only such a Torah will be eternalized, will be applied forever, will be learned forever, will be grappled with forever, will feel real and relevant in all times and in all ages. And this is what we'll be doing in this course. We will be taking artificial intelligence. We'll be looking at things which doesn't matter hundreds of years ago, tens of years ago, couldn't have been imagined. Doesn't matter, let alone discussed in the halachic literature. And we are therefore going to have this Torah as a living Torah to be able to apply it to whatever extreme new modern dilemma arises over the years. Now, we've seen how we begin with a pasuk that tells us this is what you should do, no more, no less. And then a very, very dramatic story in the Talmud, which shows us that most definitely the Torah has been given into the hands of the humans, the rabbis, the rabbinic authorities, those who are learned and who understand over the years to help develop, understand, interpret, etc. What are the different views that have been taken towards how the halakha should develop and should be applied to different practical examples over the years? We mentioned the Rambam just a few minutes ago, and I'd like to take, for example, the Rambam's view of Avodah Zarah. How does the Rambam analyze the Torah's approach to idolatry? This was the reality in the historical context at the time that the Torah was given. And the solution was not to outlaw it directly and entirely, but rather there was an attempt to wean the Jewish people off the idolatry which was totally surrounding, and to guide them in the proper direction whilst understanding the influence of the idolatry of all the nations around them and the influence that it would have on them. For example, korbanot, sacrifices that were offered up. Korbanot do have pagan connotations, and it is as if we are offering up a meal to a deity. However, the Rambam argues that the Torah was trying to educate the people who were living at that time and under those influences against Avodah Zarah, against idolatry, but it was trying to do so in a way that was relevant to them in their historical context. Now, this view suggests that the laws that were given in the Torah were based in a specific time and context, and they were relevant to the cultural norms at the time. For example, the cultural norms of idolatry. Other examples that are given are, for example, the cultural norms of slavery at the time that the Torah was given. But this would lead us to ask two questions. First of all, well, if this is so, doesn't that mean that the Torah's laws become irrelevant in other times, in other contexts, in other cultures? And second of all, can we therefore make changes to the laws given in the Torah to make them more suited and more appropriate for current times? And the Rambam, interestingly, answers those two questions in very different ways. He says that yes, the Torah was given to give laws, to present laws, and to offer guidance for those at a certain time, and to be suited to the maximum number of people. And yet, in theory, the laws of the Torah may not be suited to every individual. By definition, he argues, a law isn't a law if it doesn't have set principles. And this, by definition, incurs a certain level, a certain element of rigidity, which doesn't necessarily assist every single person in every single situation. But, the Rambam argues, despite the fact that he views the Torah's laws in such light, one could argue that there's a need for change to the laws of the Torah. And the Rambam points out that the Torah itself tells us, which we read in Source 1 together, you cannot add anything on or take anything away from the words of the Torah. They absolutely are rigidly in place to be binding upon you in all generations. And he argues very strongly that we cannot add or detract from the words of the Torah, because otherwise we would just lose the way of the Torah through so many different amendments and debates. And so he limits, quite strongly, he limits the opening for change to the words of the Torah. Just as an aside, we won't go into this too much, there are psukim of verses in the Torah in itself, which, for example, the Rambam or someone holding this view would quote to you to show you why we should also follow rabbinic commands, which of course were added on as a secondary layer because they themselves were imbued with authority by the Torah in itself. For example, lo taser, you shouldn't go right or left from the words of the halachic authorities. And you should follow the Navi and the Shofet and such a leader. The Torah in itself imbues certain leaders and authorities with the authority to create binding commands upon you.
No sound, no sound, no sound.
Is someone asking a question?
Someone was saying she lost the sound, but I can hear you. I don't know about others.
Okay. We have the Rambam's fairly narrow view here, which is contrasted with the view of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says the halakha is constantly evolving throughout the history since Har Sinai, because the revelation is continuing since that original revelation at Har Sinai. And the revelation continues to occur through the ages via different leaders, via different authorities. And therefore, the law develops and updates as they receive and announce to us different rules at different times. And he doesn't think that the Navi or the rabbinic authority or the Shofet or the leader at any specific time, he doesn't think that they merely gain their authority from a verse in the Torah that says so, that says you should listen to such and such leader. He believes that they have accepted this new revelation that has occurred as a continuous revelation throughout history, and therefore new laws will be detailed to us as a continuation of the original revelation. He therefore will understand the verse which we read in source 1 to be talking merely to the masses. To the masses of lay people out there, anyone within Jewish communities in all different times who isn't the shofet or the leader or the knowledgeable authority of the time, make sure that you don't add or detract from the laws which we have commanded you. But that is not to say that the emergence of new laws after Har Sinai is not the genuine emergence of new laws due to new revelation. So as opposed to the Rambam, he really sees all the secondary laws and interpretations as a reflection of new revelations of the Torah as it continues to be revealed to us throughout the time. Now, if we have these two philosophies at the back of our minds, we will see how, again, in practice, we may feel the tension between these two different views as we analyze how the halakha is going to apply itself to different practical questions which have arisen in modern times. The purpose of this course will never really be to state what the bottom line is to any particular question or query which we raise, because the main focus will always be on the process in itself. That is what I want us to focus on. And now we can appreciate this. The debates that will occur through the analysis of a specific rule or through the philosophical understanding of the process of our halakha will allow us to sharpen our understanding of what exactly is happening and why we reach such and such halakhic conclusion. We can learn, by the way, that in practice, of course, there has to be a bottom line. We have to choose one of the multiple opinions that's out there to be our bottom line halakha in practice. However, the theoretical multiple other opinions that are out there, they are not ignored. And they form an essential part of the corpus of a halakha. And they may be referred to, again, for example, in Shat HaDchak, in times of extreme need, the minority opinion might be brought back in. The opinion that was never understood, the logic of which was never fully understood, but it was raised by a number of Rishonim, may be pulled back in to combine with another reason to reach a lenient conclusion. And by understanding the process of the halakha, we will appreciate so much more the bottom lines that are given when someone has asked a practical question for a practical, simple answer. I want to finish here with something that I brought last year, for those who were in the introductory class last year, but I'd left only about 2 minutes to do so then, and I don't have much more now. And is a beautiful, beautiful quote, which you'll find in source 3, which I'll just briefly introduce, by Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cordoza on the meaning of halakha. Because halakha can very, very often sound like, you know, a list of instructions, a list of do's and don'ts. And he discusses how Judaism recognizes that we have a body and we have a soul, which are sometimes pulling us in contradictory directions. And we aim to train the body in the direction of the soul's desires. So by doing the correct actions, we will influence correct thoughts and mindsets. And these holy actions and deeds that we do will hopefully lead us to be able to undergo real internal, meaningful transformation in the right direction. And he says this incrementally can occur through every tiny action that we may do as part of our ritual. They can guide us towards grasping the real inner meaning. However, we can ask, why are there so many restrictions? Why are there so many little details given, both in the positive and the negative commandments, which we're instructed in? And where does it leave us with any room for creativity? Do these details and these rituals not sometimes stifle us in our path to spiritual growth and to get closer and build a relationship with Hashem? And he argues that it is mistake to think that these restrictions and boundaries inhibit our creativity, because rather it is actually the opposite. He brings the example of art. He says, if you look closely at some of the finest masterpieces out there, you will look and you will see that they come from many, many painstaking fine brush strokes. And the most beautiful masterpieces aren't created by balagan, by chaos, but by fine, detailed, infinitely delicate movements. And the same with music. Bach, for example, was a composer who very strictly adhered to the rules and regulations of composition. But the extent to which he composed and the gorgeous creativity in his repertoire was some of the most creative and complex compositions of all of the history of music, and are a delight to listen to and to play. And his originality was actually born out of some constraints. And if we read this quote, I just brought a short quote from Rabbi Cardoza together in source 3. I think I cannot put it better myself, so we should read it together. Source 3. Around 3,300 years ago, a unique symphony was composed for an ensemble of no less than 2 million people. Its composer invited his conductor into his chamber at the top of Mount Sinai. It was at this apex of history that God handed over to Moshe the masterful score upon which the Jewish people were to play the music of life. Hashem taught him exactly how it needed to be played, not a note more and not a note less. But the vibrations, intonations, interpretations of these notes were up to the musicians standing at the foot of the mountain. We will do and we will hear means that one hears in the doing. And although the divine voice spoke the same words, nobody heard the same musical sounds, because this depended on the kind of soul each one had. Every Jew is a musician. They play their spiritual music on a musical instrument called halakha. We have been given the notes, and it is left to us to bring them alive. If we seek creativity, the notes are anything but a burden. They are rather a guide. And I just thought this was the most beautiful quote describing halakha as a guide for each one of us, as a guide that does have certain restrictions, limitations, places boundaries upon us, but through those constraints, it allows us to achieve the most wonderful creativity, the most beautiful harmonies, the most delightful music that we can create. And each one of us has the option to internalize the halakha as it is meaningful to us, to interpret it with our own soul and connection to the words. And to finish with that quote was really my aim for today, because before we take any specific examples, I wanted us to appreciate the history of the development of the halakha and the beauty in the halakhic process, through which we can reach wise, balanced conclusions with sensitivity to the time, to the place, to the community with which it's relevant. And as Rav Cardoza put it so beautifully, adhering to the notes of the music which we've been given, but interpreting it with our own soul. So I hope to see all of you next week, please God, perhaps in person if circumstances permit. I again wish all of Am Yisrael refuah shlema, nichum avelim, hatzlachatu achayalim, and only besorot tovot for all of us. And may the zechut of our learning and of all the gemilut chasadim which is being done in the Jewish community bring a zechut to all of us very, very soon.
Amen.
Chodesh Tov.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.